Hello everyone. I am trying something different today. I'm gonna play some music in the background. So if you can't hear me that well, let me know. I just wanted to see what it was like if we get some tunes going on at the same time while I talk. Um, Today we're gonna talk about self-trust. So my question for you is, how many times do you have to hear the same message before you listen? So, if you feel called to grab a notebook, you're totally welcome to grab a notebook. You know I go in with my questions. I'm going to introduce myself first. If you don't know me, my name is Alyssa Aparicio. I'm a Pxssy empower and performer, and I have a holistic approach to Pxssy power that includes mind, body, spirit, and emotion. And today I wanted to talk about trusting ourselves and that opportunity to hear the inner voice, and whether we're valuing that inner voice or whether we're pushing it aside and not listening to it. This includes two parts of my hi, welcome. This includes two parts of my Pxssy empowered framework: conjure your intuitive womb and live rapturously. So if you've ever been on one of my webinars or listened to my podcast, I go more in depth around the 9 elements of Pxssy power that I address in my framework. But today we're going to focus on those two. Everyone experiences their inner messages differently, and everyone has a different level of sentience, of awareness. For me, I receive visuals in meditation often, and I receive I won't say it's like I audibly hear it, but I hear a clear message and it comes in the form of words. So those are 2 ways. Hi, thanks for throwing up the hearts. Those are 2 ways that I receive intuitive messages, and it's often like a bubble forward, or like almost like lightning, like a very clear message that I receive. So if you receive messages any particular way, please share in the chat as we talk here and share how you receive your messages. But I want to share 2 experiences that I had around trusting myself. And I've been learning I've been unlearning indecision for a really long time now. I struggled with indecision for a very painfully long amount of time in my youth, and just always found myself wrestling myself, choosing whether to choose A or choose B. And the reality is that there is no right choice. It's just a matter of, allowing the thing that is the most prominent and the most powerfully coming through, and listening to that even when logic is telling us opposite. And that's a really hard thing to do, because we are raised in this patriarchal world where we're taught to value logic and analysis over intuition and inner knowing. So already we all start at this kind of disadvantage where we have to push back against this force that is telling us to value logic and facts and all of that good stuff. So we don't really ever learn to exercise this muscle of intuitive knowing. So I've had experiences in my life where I receive very powerful messages, and one of them, I'll just share a quick story that I've never really talked about before. One of those, acknowledging your gut feeling, totally. Yes, the gut feeling, then that's the area of the womb space. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Thanks for sharing that, Emily. So one experience I had where I did not listen to this resounding voice message that I received. I was with this guy. I won't call it we were dating. I'll say it was a situationship or something like that. And I was hooking up with this guy, and I kept getting this message. Well, I got it once really powerfully, and then it kept tapping me on the shoulder, and it said, you need to not mess around with this guy anymore. It just was very clear. Y'all need to part ways. He's a dead weight on you. And I was like, well, it's easy to hang out with him. He's not a bother. He's just kind of there. I don't really see the big deal. It doesn't seem to have to be now. But I kept getting this message, like a tap on the shoulder, you don't really need to, you need to end things with this guy. But my logic told me it doesn't seem necessary. He seems pretty harmless, and the situation seems, It's fine. And there then came a time when we were hooking up at one point, and I should probably put a trigger warning here. I don't feel very triggered in discussing this, although I've never really shared this story before. He decided that we were gonna have sex without a condom, and we always had sex with condoms. And I said no, and he took advantage of me. So I won't go too in depth into that story right now because I feel I've done a lot of healing work around that, and I'm not going to I don't blame myself at all around this, because obviously the ball was in his court, and the ball wasn't in his court, but he stepped outside boundaries and he stepped outside lines, and that's his fault. So I don't believe in victim blaming, and I'm not blaming myself, and I don't blame myself. But I did hear a very clear message that I ignored. And that is one way that I learned to heed those messages that don't seem really logical, but that come from a deeper knowing. So I'll tell another story about a time when I really did listen, and this is at the start of quarantine, when I got a very clear message as I was driving home from work one night that I needed to quit my job. I needed to do it by the end of December, and I needed to invest in a coaching program for business. All these messages, they came very clearly through, like when I was driving my car, and that was one of those moments that it felt like lightning, like so much clarity. And since I've been exercising this for so long, since I've been exercising this intuitive listening, in that moment I could hear it. And in that moment I said, well, damn, that was very clear. I guess I have to do that. I guess I have to listen. And I won't say that it was from one day to the next where I decided that I was going to listen, but I will say that in that moment, it was pretty much a done deal. And I was just catching up to this new reality that I was being called towards. And when I look back now and I see what happened at the end of December, when I could have been still working and endangering myself. I worked with a lot of international people. And at the same time, I had everything in place that I knew that I was going to quit my job. So when I lost my job at the beginning of the year, I had already decided. So it was a time in my life, or right now is a time in my life, where I'm witnessing the power of listening to those very clear, intuitive messages. So it didn't come to start to hear these messages so crystal clearly overnight. But I have incorporated practice, a daily ritual of tuning in, of listening to my womb and like listening to my gut, like you say, Emily. For me, my intuition feels like it lives in my womb, in my pussy. I feel it here the most. When I place my hands here, I usually can receive clear messages. For you, it might be your heart. For you, it might be another area in your body that you receive those. And again, it could be audible for you. It could be like a vision for you. It could be something that comes through when you're journaling. And we all come to that in different ways. But I have decided to craft out space in my daily life to respect and undiscover and uncover intuitive womb listening. And I call it womb listening, but intuitive listening in general. And creating these daily practices in conjunction with affirmations like, I trust myself, I can trust my inner voice, I can trust my womb, I can trust the messages that come to me, and really practicing that, because it's a muscle, like I said, that's kind of atrophied due to the patriarchal conditioning that we have all experienced. Whether we're male, female, whatever gender we identify with, we can all relate to the idea that logic comes over with internal wisdom, intuitive wisdom, and intuition is not valued or spoken about or taught. And I think that it should be taught from a very young age, because it's a very real force. And on the other hand, going forward, one of my current goals is to take that delay time out of when I hear a message and when I listen to it. That brings us back to the question I asked, right? Like, how many times do you have to hear the same message before you listen? And I'm trying to personally close that window so that when I feel that message come through, that I trust in that moment, and that I continue to say yes and continue to trust and exercise my intuitive knowing, so that I am in alignment, in my own alignment. I am following the source energy. I'm following the deeper knowing that lives in all of us, the divinity that lives in all of us. And I want to be, my desire is that I stop dangling those carrots in front of my head. And maybe you can relate to this. Those things that you say, yeah, maybe one day I can do that. Maybe one day I'll be that person. Maybe one day I can have that relationship. Maybe one day I can do that course. Maybe one day I will live my dreams. And I know you can probably relate to this. I want to personally stop dangling those carrots in front of my face and say, okay, today is the day that I can live into who I came here to be. Today is the day that I can trust myself. Today is the day that I can hear those voices and say yes to this eternal internal knowing. And that brings me to the other part of my framework, which I was talking about, which is live rapturously. That is around havingness, honestly. It's our ability to say yes to our desires. It is our right to hear our desires, and desire is a nourishing force. It is a driving force. It is part of our ego, but our ego is not a detrimental factor. Our ego is part of being alive. And our desire is constantly telling us what the next step is. It's constantly telling us where to put our foot in front of the other foot, and what direction to go, and who and how to move forward. And when we listen and we make space to say, yes, I get to have what I desire, and I get to live the life that I desire, and that becomes part of our daily mantra, daily focus, daily commitment, that we get to play big, that we get to leave behind the old shell of playing small, and all the ways that we have witnessed women play small, and all the ways that we have witnessed the patriarchy squish women into a box. But we get to take that lid off in our lifetime, and we get to do that by increasing our ability to have, our havingness. And when we have more, we're not taking from anyone else. We're not taking our desires out of the hands of anyone else. Everyone, there's so much abundance. There is enough for all. And when we say yes to our desires and we exercise our ability to have more, then we're writing a new story. And when we look at the women in our lives, when we look at our ancestors and the ways that they lived their lives, perhaps you have women in your life who squish themselves into boxes, and and you're throwing out the heart. So I think you can relate, and you experience this in your life and your relationships with other women and your family, that we haven't been told for very long that we can have what we want. And I'm telling you right now, if you've never heard it before so bluntly, you can have what you fucking want. You can fucking trust yourself. Your desires come from a deeply rooted place. They're not, and whims and desires are different, right? Whims, they feel flighty and they feel like feathery, and sometimes whims and desires can feel very similar, but I'm talking about real desire that comes forth from you or comes to you in this way that is undeniable. You can trust those fucking desires. You can. And you can trust yourself to know when the next message comes forward to listen to it, whether it's telling you, okay, you desire chocolate, okay, now you've had enough chocolate, you can put the chocolate down. A lot of women are afraid that once we get what we desire, we're going to be like vacuum cleaners that just soak up everything, and we're just going to be like these gluttonous. I mean, I'm a hedonist. I admit that I love pleasure, and that I think that pleasure is a driving force. It's a nourishing force, and that when I look at the women in the past, in my ancestry, I see that they didn't put themselves first. And they didn't give themselves enough pleasure. And so I feel it's part of my calling to expand my havingness, expand my capacity for pleasure, live rapturously, live voraciously, expand what I think is possible, because we're just at the tip of the iceberg with what's possible for us as women. And so I bring that question back to where we started. How many times do you have to hear the same message before you listen? And do you trust yourself? Honestly, being honest with yourself. Do you trust yourself, and where are you on that spectrum of 1 to 10? 1 being I don't trust myself at all, 10 being I trust myself fully. And I'm gonna invite you to look at that and reflect on that under the light of this full moon in Aquarius, under this Leo season, which is all about our radical truth. And being a Leo, I feel really like ignited right now. So I ask you to be honest with yourself, to take more space for honesty. Hedonist life, pleasure equals power. Yes, Stacy, I so fucking agree. So I ask you if you can examine your relationship with your self-trust and your ability to have, and your ability to listen to those messages, and just to take some time today to reflect on that, and to know that when those messages come along, that you can trust yourself. You can trust yourself. And I'm going to be continuing to practice that myself, and seeing the areas where I shy away from trusting myself and replacing that with the affirmation, I can trust myself. So I hope that message was helpful for you today, or illuminating for you today. I invite you that if you're feeling called to my sensual summer camp, and you've been feeling the call, and it's been, popping up in your thoughts and popping up in your mind as the days go on, like I so have experienced with many different courses that I've signed up for. If you're feeling called, don't just pinch off the hose and say, no, it's not for me, and no, I can't do that. But if you're feeling inspired and ignited to explore your sensuality and dive deeper into your self-trust with the tool of sensual movement and sensuality, I invite you to DM me and let's set up a call, a 15-minute call, so we can just talk about where you're at and see if it's a good fit for you. So yes, don't hesitate to DM me. And share your reflections if you're listening live, or it really resonated with you, Katya. I'm so happy to hear that it resonated with you today. I feel like it's an astrological, I didn't decide to choose this topic today. It's just been so alive within me. And part of the reason, as I shared in my post today, is because, on the one hand, Walter Mercado. Does anybody know him? Did you watch his documentary? Because that shit has me, so worked up and so excited about life. He was such an incredible person, and I am so inspired by his documentary. It's on Netflix right now. So part of that is just seeing how he was able to trust himself and trust that he had a message to bring to the world, and trust in his extravagance and his flamboyance and his opulence. All of that was a vehicle for him to get his message out to the world. And he did not deny himself. He didn't play small. He didn't put on a suit and tie or a plaid shirt. His name is Walter Mercado, and his documentary is called Con Mucho Mucho Amor. I think that's the title. It's on Netflix. And I was so inspired by him, and so inspired by his conviction in himself when that was so outside of the norm and so outside of conventionality. And we get to decide that every day. We get to decide if we're going to fit in the norm, or we're going to go and be our own fucking person. Every day we have the opportunity to break through a mold, a layer that is telling us that we have to be small. So I'm just coming with that message today that feels like it's astrologically and divinely wanting to come through me. And I so appreciate you being here and listening and sharing parts of your journey and where you're at in this process. And if you're watching this on replay, you're welcome to share where you're at in this journey of self-trust. And I will continue to share where I'm at and be honest about the process and what I've learned along the way. So sending you so much love. Mwah. Have a beautiful, what day is it? Tuesday. Bye everyone.